Hey guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to knit with circular knitting needles. Circular knitting needles are two normal knitting needles, but they're connected by a plastic, kind of a plastic string, and this makes it easy to make projects like hats or something that's bigger, that's going to be in a kind of a tube shape. Circular knitting needles work as an easy alternative to using double pointed needles when you want to knit in the round. You don't have to worry about switching needles or getting stitches lost because you're having to navigate all these different needles. To get started, you guessed it, all you're going to need is a pair of circular knitting needles and some yarn.
A lot of circular knitting needles have a limit to how many how wide or how big how many stitches you can cast on, so that can kind of limit you. But other than that, I mean, it's a really good alternative to knitting with double pointed needles. So to start, I'm just going to cast on some stitches. This circular knitting needle is pretty big. It lets you cast on, I think, over 100 stitches really. So you could probably make a small sweater on this. But I'm only going to cast on as a couple stitches, since this is going to be, full disclosure, I'm not actually knitting anything that you would actually be able to wear. I'm just going to show you the basics of using the circular knitting needle. Cast on your stitches and then we'll go from there. I've finished casting on, and as I predicted, I did not keep them organized and it is kind of a mess here. So you'll want to straighten out your stitches. You'll want to make sure that there's no twists. Like right there is a huge twist in this green part. So what you can do is you can get a friend and just untwist them slowly. If you pull it tight like this and then use another hand to kind of organize the stitches, that's an easy way to do it. You'll basically just want to get everything organized and get this little ridge part on the inside of the circle. Once it's organized and you have everything in a straight, nice little ridge there, you want to bring the two ends of your needles together. You're going to take the long end, so the part of the yarn that's connected to the rest of the yarn, you're going to connect that. You're going to start knitting from here to there. We're going to start knitting on the end of the yarn, so right where we cast it on, that's where we're going to start knitting with the yarn right here that's connected to the rest of the yarn. And once you've got it all straightened out, you don't need to worry about what's going on down here anymore. Just as long as it's all straightened out when you started and you put them together, then it will turn out okay. To start, you just start like normal. Take your needle that has the rest of the yarn attached to it and line it up with the needle that you started on, the part of the yarn that you started on, and just start knitting. This first row, like all first rows for knitting, can be kind of difficult and get kind of tight, but once you get through that, it's pretty easy from here on out. You don't ever have to worry about turning around the rows or switching needles or anything like that. Everything stays ready for you. And as you're knitting, the yarn that's on your right hand, or the needle that's on your right hand if you're right-handed, is gonna start filling up with stitches from the left. So what you do is you just push them down and then push them down along the circle part, and then on the left side you can push up more stitches that will be ready to knit. So you can keep everything even. You don't have to worry about pulling anything too tight or anything like that. It's very, very simple. So I've just knit a couple stitches here, and before I push it all the way down, you can see pretty clearly where I started. If you look closely, I started right here, so you can see there's two little layers, well, I guess just one layer of stitches right here, and then here's just that first unknitted layer of stitches that was first casted on. So if you ever need to keep track of however many rows you're doing, this is going to be a really good indicator of where you're at. Each time you go around, that's going to count as one row, and there's always going to be a little step here, a little tiny step That's going to indicate where the row ends and a new row begins. So I'm just going to knit a couple rows on this just to build up kind of a nice little base. And then once I do that, I'm going to show you a couple more tips and tricks. So now I have knit only a couple more rows, and it took me a while because this is way too big of a circular knitting needle. This is like too big for a hat, too small for anything else. But it gives you a good idea of how to knit with circular knitting needles. I have about 3 rows of stockinette stitches right here. The stockinette stitches are always gonna kind of be really flat, and they're gonna go to the back. When you purl, I just did 2 rows of purls right here. They're gonna come to the forward, up to the front of the knitting. So now, let's say that you want to decrease your knitting. To do that, you just decrease like normal, but because you're knitting in the round, it's a lot more difficult to tell where any of your stitches are going to be. A good way to tell where you are if you're not counting stitches or anything like that is to use just a stitch marker. I don't have like fancy stitch markers, I just like to use a piece of yarn to tell me where I'm gonna be decreasing. So I'll lay down a little piece of scrap yarn right here, and then let's say I want to decrease, so I'll just knit those 2 stitches together like a normal decrease, and then I'll keep knitting. So this scrap piece of yarn, I'll come back to it once I've gone around, and I'll know that I was decreasing right after the blue piece, and I can just take it out and throw it away. Another thing when you're decreasing though, because you're decreasing in the round, you're gonna wanna keep it even depending on what you're wanting to do. So some people will count, they'll like decrease every 4th stitch or 5th stitch. As you decrease though, your knitting will get pretty tight. That's just how the circular knitting needles work. This is not gonna shrink. So if you're decreasing your stitches, things are gonna get pretty tight pretty soon, and you're gonna have to transfer eventually to either double pointed needles or finish your project. So here it is now. I've successfully transferred it over to 4 double pointed needles. And then from there you can actually see how ruffly it is because of how big it started out, and then I got really tight really quickly when I decreased. But from there you can just knit in the round with double pointed needles like you normally would. If you don't know how to do that, I do have a tutorial about using double pointed needles. It's fairly simple. It's kind of a slower process than circular knitting needles, but it is definitely a lot of fun. And that's how you would finish a project like this if you were doing like a really, I guess, a huge hat in this case, or if you were doing like a sweater or something like that. So hopefully that was helpful. Really the most difficult part with knitting with circular knitting needles is just first starting out, casting on and making sure that everything is straightened out and not twisted or anything like that. But let me know if you have any questions. Hopefully that was helpful, and I'll see you next time.